So I never thought in 2024 that I would discuss this case. As far as I was concerned, this case was over. The brothers were sent to prison. And so I am very shocked that I am discussing it today. The Menendez brothers were found guilty of killing their parents. They went to prison. Haven't really heard about them in a long time. But now there is new evidence that has been brought to light that could exonerate the Menendez brothers. Now, what is interesting about this is that this also happens during a time that a Netflix documentary has been released called Monsters, the Menendez Brothers. I am watching it. I'm almost finished with the docuseries. I haven't finished it quite yet. But I want to warn you, Eric Menendez, who is one of the brothers, has already stated that he is not happy about the docuseries. And he has said that there are a number of lies that are told throughout that series. So I just want to forewarn you about that. I don't want to get too much into it. All I would say is that if you watch it, just make sure you do fact checking afterwards. So just FYI. But now there is new evidence. One of the things that the Menendez brothers said when they were on trial is that the reason why they killed their parents was because of self-defense. Now, they argued in court that they were sexually abused by their father. And they said they had no choice but to kill their parents because of that. You have to understand the political landscape. You have to understand the time period. During that time, particularly in this country, that was not something that people were willing to talk about. It wasn't well received. The jury at that time did not believe the story about the abuse. And it's interesting because if you watch the docuseries, you're probably going to think to yourself, how in the hell did they not believe these guys, right? But you got to consider the time period. That was just not something that was really brought forward or brought to light at that point in time. Well, now this information could change everything. An author describes how he found key evidence that could free Menendez brothers. Again, this is crazy news, ladies and gentlemen. I can't believe this is happening. We're going to read a little bit of this here, then I'm going to get to the clip. It says an author who has been working on the story of Lyle and Eric Menendez for decades have claimed that a letter he found during his investigation may be key to freeing the brothers from prison after nearly 3 decades. Robert Rand, the author of the Menendez murders, said Thursday that a letter that he found in 2018 was what Eric sent to cousin Andy Kano 9 months before the murders, complaining about the abuse from his father. Eric Menendez was 17 years old when the letter was written and sent. And that's another thing as well. Eric was underage at that point in time. His brother Lyle was legally an adult. I believe he was a college student at one point, and there's so much more that goes into that. But Eric in particular was still a minor. I found a letter in a dresser full of Andy Kano's paper in 2018 when his mother, Marta, let me go through his room. And she said, if you find anything, great. I found that letter and realized it was a major piece of new evidence. So let's go ahead and get into the clip here, because again, I had forgotten all about these guys. I'm just keeping it real, and I was very young at the time anyway, so I didn't know a lot about the situation. The narrative that was displayed about the Menendez brothers is that they were 2 rich kids from Beverly Hills who wanted to kill their parents. And there wasn't a lot of sympathy for them at that point in time. But now with this new evidence, there is a possibility that they could be exonerated. And I want to get into this clip here with Chris Cuomo, and actually Rosie O'Donnell is a part of this as well. She's talking about how this could be a game changer for them. Let's get into this.
Counselor Guerra goes first. Help us understand what changed and what could still change.
Well, what changed was, I think, when we discovered or were able to get the declaration of Roy Rosella, who was a member of Menudo. And he declared under penalty of perjury that he too was molested by Jose in the house, in the family house. You combine that with the letter that Eric had written prior to the killings, 8 months prior, to his cousin, who's now dead, Andy Cano. And we combined that together and we filed back in May of last year what's called a writ of habeas corpus, which is a fancy legal term, Latin term, for basically set aside this conviction. Bring me the.
So let's read this. I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I never know when it's going to happen and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking that he might come in. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle. So this is another thing that was mentioned throughout the trial, which was that his older brother Lyle was not aware of this for quite some time until he eventually did, let him know. But apparently, from what the brothers said, the father started abusing Lyle first, and then Lyle eventually was like, I can't do this anymore. And then he stopped abusing Lyle, and then he started abusing Eric, his younger brother. When you watch the docuseries, one of the things that it is going to show you is that the mother apparently knew. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but they are going to show you that in the docuseries, that the mother knew what was going on all along and did nothing about it. They're also going to show you a therapy session between the mother and the father, where the mother admits that she came from an abusive household. And apparently the father also, it alleges, came from an abusive household, and that the father, what he was doing to his sons was also done to him. Now, again, I don't know how true that is because it's a docuseries and it's not uncommon for docuseries to exaggerate or embellish for a dramatic effect. I think we all have seen this with the Aaliyah series, the Whitney Houston series. We've seen this before. We're like, wait a minute, did that really happen? So I do say, again, do your own research after you watch it.
Body under the Latin. Also, since that time that we filed the habeas corpus, the changes in California law have allowed for what's called resentencing. And George Gascon, who's the DA here in Los Angeles, has a robust resentencing unit in which they take a look at sentences that were imposed years ago that were wildly disproportionate to what they might be today. And we are running down both those parallel tracks. We've supplied to them all kinds of information, what we call mitigation information, about them, and we're hoping now, and today was kind of an amazing day from our standpoint, that even 30 days before an election, and mind you, part of the argument that I've been making for a year and a half is that these guys were convicted because of DA electoral politics some 30 years ago. Mind you, the evidence portion of their second trial, where you mentioned they were convicted, started 8 days after the acquittal of O.J. Simpson, and the DA was on his heels at that point, and they needed a conviction.
Let me just pause here. So that's another thing I want to mention is that what else was going on at that time? The O.J. Simpson trial as well. It was a crazy time in America during that period. And something I want to point out as well, this is Lyle here on the left, and this is Eric on the right. And I want to point out something about Lyle, which I did not know until recently. Lyle apparently was wearing a hairpiece, which I just thought that was his hair, but was wearing a hairpiece because he started losing his hair when he was a teenager. And I don't mean like, we all have shedding. I don't mean like shedding. His hair was falling out in clumps when he was a teenager. Now, I'm no therapist and I'm no doctor, but if I were to make an assumption, maybe that could have something to do with the stress that was happening within the household. That's what I would assume. But I don't think it's common for a teenage boy to lose his hair in clumps like that, right? But he's wearing a hairpiece and he's wearing it at that trial as well.
Also, Mark, remind people, what was the difference between the first and second trial?
Well, first trial, 2 juries. Those juries heard the abuse evidence. Both juries, deliberating separately, the majority found not guilty of murder. They were hung juries between murder and manslaughter. Second time around, 8 days after the OJ acquittal, was one jury. They largely were prevented from presenting evidence of the abuse. And then what always has galled me is the DA got up in the closing argument in front of just one jury this time and argued that it was an abuse excuse when he knew very well that he was the one who had convinced the judge to exclude the lion's share of the abuse evidence that the juries, two separate juries, had heard and hung on in the first time around.
Let me pause here for a second. One thing I want to add about the testimony. It's not like they got up on the stand and they said, my father abused me. When they took the stand, they gave vivid details about what happened to them. And that's why I think, looking back on it, it's like, wow, like the jury didn't believe them. But listening to this extra piece of information about the DA needing a win at that point in time, after not getting a win for the O.J. Simpson trial, now this is starting to make even more sense. Now, they didn't say in trial that they did not kill their parents. They said that they did. But the angle that their lawyer was going with was that they did so out of self-defense. And so now that this letter has been released, now it points to here's more evidence that shows that there was abuse that was happening. And if that is the case, where does the self-defense angle stand now? So that's what this is really about. Regardless of whether or not you believe or whatever, or how you feel about them killing their parents, what is being explored here is the fact that if the abuse, they have evidence that shows that there was abuse that was happening, does the self-defense angle now stand up? And were they found guilty just because mainly the DA did want a win? So there's a lot happening here. I told you guys the criminal justice system is crazy.
Rosie, thank you for your patience. And I know you know all this already, but the audience has got to get up to speed. Yes. So first of all, how was this news today met by the brothers?
Well, I called them after I spoke to Mark last night about doing this appearance, and I said, what's going on? And they said, they're hesitant to hope. After being in jail and prison for 35 years and being abused for his childhood up to that point, these men don't have a lot of bandwidth to hope for what exactly happened. And, I want to thank the millennial culture of all these kids online who said, we learned about this in government class, we learned about this in civics, and how did this happen? And they started the Free the Menendez Brothers online, and it got people interested in the documentary about Roy Rosello, the Menudo member, and how he was savagely raped.
Abused. I want to show you something. We'll come back to the clip here because this is important. It was the younger generation, or people call the TikTok generation, that decided, let's go dig into this case again because this does not make any sense. Like, how was this just dismissed, that they went through all these years of abuse? So again, people got to think back to Rosie O'Donnell's point, think back to the time period. At that point in time, this is not something that was, openly discussed out there. Like, telling someone that your parents were abusing you in that way. It was just not, I don't feel like the public was ready to accept that or to hear it. There was also the fact that they're rich. I mean, they lived in Beverly Hills. People are like, oh, these are just spoiled rich kids, etc. But I want to get to the Rosello issue, and we'll come back to the clip because we keep hearing that name. So I want to explain to you another piece that could help them with this particular case, and that is Menudo. Now, some of you may not remember this group. It was a boy group, a Puerto Rican boy group called Menudo. You may recognize one of them. Over to the right here, that is Ricky Martin. So Ricky Martin, this is how he got his start. And I remember when he was on General Hospital later on as well. But before he was Living La Vida Loca, he was a member of the boy group Menudo. The gentleman that is in question, the one that said that he was also abused by Eric and Lyle's dad, is this gentleman right here, right here. And you'll see another one I'll show you. And I point this out, and I point out Ricky Martin because it wasn't too long ago that Ricky Martin was facing sexual abuse claims himself. And so, and I don't know. I don't know if Ricky innocent or not, but I know, it makes you wonder, like, did something happen to Ricky Martin too? Like when he was a part of this group, it makes you wonder. And it makes you wonder if that's the case. Was that behavior repeated? I don't know. We don't know. I'm saying I don't know because I don't want Ricky coming for me like Jay-Z coming for Piers Morgan. Okay. Okay. All right. But that's the gentleman. So it says, could a Menudo member's sex abuse allegations against the Menendez brothers' dad help free the siblings? So that is him here to the left. And I just want to read this part here where it says right here. The abuse allegations gained traction in recent years after Roy Rossello, that's who I just showed you, a former member of the iconic 1980s boy band Menudo, came forward with his own allegations that he was also assaulted by Jose, by their dad. So now you have another person who was underage at that point in time, who is saying that they were also assaulted by the dad. So everybody need to understand, and this is information that would have been really helpful, I guess, to them at that point in time. But here we are. Let's get back to that clip.
And then with the Lyle letter that came out, it was like there's so much new evidence that they must take a look at the fact that in 1989, right, no one was ready to believe that fathers raped their sons, yes, but they do. Yeah, and it's scary.
Or they didn't want to. We were so different the way we were raised. In terms of cultural awareness, right, until of stereotypes and what is a man and how a man's supposed to behave. It was so different, yes, that millennials can't even yep, picture it. They don't even see it in their own parents because we're all loving them so much to make up for how we were raised. But Rosie, there's always been this suspicion that if the Menendez brothers were the Menendez sisters, do you think this would have come out, yes, differently even back then?
Well, I think that if Eric was Erica, yep, that Lyle would be a hero today. Because,
and people have to really hear this and understand this, because the reality is, especially at that point in time, is that for men, the macho attitude at that point in time is like, it's like you had to be macho, masculine, that kind of thing. And for a boy to go and tell someone that their father was doing that to them, I don't really think American culture was readily to accept that. I mean, let's just keep it real. So I agree with Rosie when she said, if Eric had been Erica, yes, I do think they would have more likely been believed. And I think also there would have been more sympathy. Now, why is this important? This still happens today. And people need to understand, like, when we talk about like different types of abuse, that includes men too. It's not just women. It's not just little girls. It's also little boys that can be abused by other men, family member, coach. You hear about it later on. Like look at a lot of the professional athletes that have come forward in the past couple of years that said they were abused by someone when they were a kid. So it happens to men too. And people need to understand that.
As a father viciously raping a child since they were 8 years old, all the way up until they were 17, and telling them they couldn't go live in a dorm because they had to stay home and service the father. If yep, all of those facts were known to people, they would understand what happened. And
the biggest problem is, particularly with Eric was underage at that point in time. He was still underage. And I think that's the part, because the biggest question that people ask is, well, why didn't they just leave? So again, Eric was a kid, was still underage. Lyle was not. One of the arguments that Lyle gave over and over again is that he said, we thought about that. We thought about running away, but he would always find us. They always had a way. Their father was a big time executive. I think he had signed Menudo, if I remember correctly. He got Menudo signed. So this is someone who was very well known, had a lot of money. They were living in Beverly Hills. So I guess that there was that too. And then I go back to the trial, and one of the things that bothered me was the line of questioning. To ask someone whether or not they wanted that to happen to them when they were between the ages of 6 and 8 years old. They were a child. Children cannot consent. So I think about some of the questions that were presented to them in the courtroom, and I'm like, there's no way you would ask this today. You would not ask this. A child? So what do you mean? Did they want that? They were a child. They don't know what they want. And it's mind-boggling to me when I think back to that trial today, and I'm like, there's no way that line of questioning would be acceptable today.
Sadly, I think, Chris, that unless you have experienced this kind of tortured existence of an incestuous family and all the lies that cover one another, unless you experience that, it's very hard to believe. Why didn't they just walk away? Well, they were 17 and 21. They were kids. Right. They were children who had been abused the vast majority of their childhood in horrific ways. It wasn't a casual father that came in drunk, and this was a sophisticated pedophile who was doing abusive terror to these children.
And I don't want to get too deep into, because Rosie gets a little graphic there. I want to jump ahead. They do talk about some of that in the docuseries, but these kids, like, honestly, and what people have to understand is, like, when that happens to children, like, children don't get over being sexually abused. Like, even when you become an adult, like, that's something that stays with you. And I look back and, like, for the mother to just sit, like, what would that, let's finish.
The series, before any of this happened, I interviewed Lyle Menendez, and this was absolutely where his head was at that time. Here it is for the audience, just to show that this is not new.
What do you remember being told by your mother, by your father, their actions that made you feel that your life may be in danger?
Well, my father was telling me that a couple days before that I had made my decision in terms of siding with Eric and wanting to threaten to expose him, and he was now forced to make his own decisions about what to do about that. And I asked him if that's a threat, and he said, you take it for what it is. I know my father. I know what that means. He's basically suggesting that he isn't going to go through a child molestation trial. He would rather go through a murder trial than a child molestation trial.
Did you hear what he just
the point is,
so he said his father said he would rather go through a murder trial than a, sexual abuse trial. That's what he said his father said.
I may look like my own son, even from 7 years ago, but Lyle Menendez has been consistent in what he says happened all throughout. And Rosie, how does this impact you?
I was a kid who grew up in a similar situation, not as terrifying or horrific, but definitely generational abuse and alcoholism in an Irish Catholic family. And there have been, many people who have suffered as a result, including, siblings and cousins. And so when I initially read the story, I was very drawn to it. And then I got a letter when my TV show was on in the 90s from Lyle. And he said, I've heard you speak positively about us, and I hope this is not the reason that I think it is, that you can relate to the. And I, at that time, was in no way interested in exploring that subject in my own family and my own life. But through knowing Lyle and through being older and understanding your desire to help is bigger than your fear of being ostracized, and you do help, and it actually heals you. And so this has been very healing for me, and I've been in touch with the boys for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, and I feel as though I know them very intimately. And if you thought that they were creative, horrible, gangsterish kind of guys, why have they had no charges in 34 years against them in the prison system? Why are they one of the most lauded prisoners in the California system? They are not the men that were described in the Ryan Murphy monsters. They are not that. That was inaccurate, wildly inaccurate, and I feel unjust in many ways. And so I'm so glad that this is happening now, right after that. I called them when that show aired, and I said, I encourage you to not watch it.
Yeah, and I'll let it in there. But I was going to tell you guys again, like I said, I'm almost done with the docuseries, and yeah, even I have some questions, and I honestly said that, like, look, some of these things I have to look into myself because I don't believe everything that's being shown through this docuseries. So you just gotta, again, take it with a grain of salt. But it's crazy. It's crazy when you think about this now, all because of this letter. And it just really makes you wonder, like, again, what would have happened if they did have that evidence at that point in time, if they did believe them, at that point in time. And we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see if this does exonerate them. But Kim Kardashian also, I don't know if you guys know this, she also went to go visit the Menendez brothers. She's been working towards, I guess, like helping free prisoners. So that's a project that she's been working on for quite some time. And what was also interesting is that the two actors that played Eric and Lyle in the docuseries also visited them in prison. So again, of course, the actors have no say in how the docuseries turns out. But like I said, Eric did issue a statement that said that he was not happy about the docuseries and that there were a number of lies. So just take that into consideration if you choose to watch it. But apparently it appears that there was some injustice that was done. And hopefully this gets worked out for them. But I can understand them not being too excited or getting their hopes up. There are a number of prisoners now they did kill their parents. There's no lie about that. They did kill their parents, but there are a number of people that have been imprisoned that didn't do the crime. And every now and then a group comes along and says, we want to help, free you and get you out. And usually it does not happen. So I can understand them not being excited.